I have a love-hate relationship with IPA and these acrylic paints. I love it because it makes the paint dry super fast, which means when I am painting a project, I can put multiple coats on without having to stop. By the time I'm done painting one side of the project, the other side's already dry and ready for the next coat. Now, the hate portion of my relationship with IPA is it dries super fast. Now, what I mean by that, guys, is if you're not careful, it will dry in your airbrush. The other problem that I have with IPA and these inexpensive craft paints is that once you start mixing them, because that is alcohol and the craft paints are water-based, that alcohol makes the water evaporate very quickly. That's why it dries super quick when you're painting with it. But it also takes that paint and turns it into almost a rubbery consistency. I have used water to thin these acrylic craft paints, and I've never had a good experience using water. And I have also used airbrush specific reducer with these paints. Works fantastic, but the whole idea here is to use something inexpensive with these inexpensive paints to keep the costs down. That way we can use our money and buy things that are more important, like locomotives, stuff like that, that are very expensive. And it dawned on me, what about windshield washer fluid? How will this work thinning these paints? It's kind of like water, but there's got to be an additive to it to make it, clean your windshield. Let's find out. Okay, everyone, here's how I plan on this test going. What we have in front of us here are 4 different brands of the acrylic craft paints. I have Apple Barrel, Deco Art, Americana, Folk Art, and Anita's brands of craft paints. I have them in a shades from a very light shade to a very dark shade. Here's the plan. I'm going to take our windshield washer fluid that we will be using as our paint reducer. I'll be reducing each one of these colors down to where they can be shot through an airbrush, and we're going to paint some of these 55-ton coal hoppers that I had left over from our previous 2 videos. Okay, I'm not going to show every one of these being mixed unless there's something funny that I find out happening, but we're going to start with this one. And again, this is how I mix our inexpensive acrylic craft paints. As a matter of fact, this is kind of how you mix almost any paint. Now I'm going to start with just putting in the paint right into a little mixing jar here. Now you can see this paint is kind of thin already, which is pretty good, so it doesn't means I won't have to use quite as much reducer to thin it down, but it is still a bit thick. I'm going to use a pipette. I'm going to be grabbing some of this windshield washer fluid here, of course, and we're going to put a drop in here. Actually, I'm going to put a little bit more in there. I can tell just by looking at it, it needs just a little bit more, at least to get us started. Let me see if I can get it up here in the camera so you guys can see better. What we're looking for, like I said, is the consistency of milk. When you put it up against the edge there, see how it's running, but it's not running like super fast, like thin water. That is almost perfect. Okay, I have finished reducing these paints using our windshield washer fluid. Now, to let you know how this went, I used approximately the same amount of paint in each one of these bottles to give us a baseline. Now, as you saw in the video, this sky blue paint from Apple Barrel was so thin in a bottle already that I actually ended up over reducing it and had to fix it in this jar. These two, even though they are different brands, the viscosity of these paints was very, very similar. So similar, in fact, that I used the same amount of windshield washer fluid to reduce each one of these. This last one, however, was very, very thick. To give you an idea, this sky blue, I could have used probably just half a pipette full of our windshield washer fluid to get it reduced to the consistency of milk. These two, I used 1 pipette full for each one of these to get it to the consistency of milk that we want. This last one, however, I had to use a 3.5 pipettes full of our windshield washer fluid to get it down to the consistency of milk. I have left these paints sit in these jars for right around 30-35 minutes now. I did that because I want to see if these paints are going to congeal or turn into that rubbery-like consistency that I always get when I'm using isopropyl alcohol to reduce my paints with. We'll be seeing how that turns out as I am loading these paints into the airbrush. Alright, here is our first coal hopper that we will be painting, and I will be using my Iwata Eclipse HPCS, my favorite airbrush that I own, and I will be using also this Emiad's air compressor, this little portable air compressor that I have reviewed and talked about 100 times because I love this thing. It works fantastic. As a matter of fact, there will be a link in the description below to this air compressor if you're interested in checking it out. As always, I'm gonna mention this 100 million times, you need to get a strainer or something to filter your paints. This is the most important step of all the steps when it comes to airbrushing. You want to make sure that you get any big chunks out of your paints so that it does not clog your airbrush. I'm going to tell you what, folks, if you do this, probably at least 80% of the problems that you end up having using an airbrush are going to go away if you filter your paints. That's still coming out pretty nice. There goes the ball bearing. No, I do not see any congealing inside the bottle. That is a good sign. All right, now I'm going to paint this coal car. I did not use any kind of primer on it to begin with. I know that's what we always should do, but for this test, I want to see how it's going to do against just plain old plastic. And well, actually, this is resin. This is a resin print. So let's see how it works. Okay, let's take a look at how our first coat went. This was a relatively thin coat. It actually was a little bit thicker than what I would normally put on. And I can see a little bit of water spotting on this particular hopper. Now, is that the paint, or is that because I did not use a primer on it and I did not clean this at all? Let us see on our next few coats if that will go away or not. Now on to our next color. This is our sea glass. This is our next darker color, which is still a very light color. So let's see if this congealed at all. So far it looks pretty good. Take a look inside the bottle, and again there does not appear to be any congealing like I get when I use our isopropyl alcohol. Alright, let's see how this one goes. Alright, this is our first light tack coat. Okay, we are on to our third color. This is the darker green. Oh, and just so you know, I actually went up and had dinner in between painting with the lighter green in this one. So this has been sitting in this jar for, a good hour and a half now. Let's see if this has thickened up any. Still pouring out pretty good. Let's take a look inside the bottle. And no, it did not thicken up at all. I do believe we have found something that's going to work and keep these paints from congealing and turning into that rubbery-like substance that we get using our isopropyl alcohol. And again, we are going to start with just a light coat. Then I will turn the camera off and I will finish up with 3 more coats. On to our last color that we're going to be testing. And this is the red one. This is the one that was very, very thick at the beginning. Let's see how this one pours out. And it's still a little thick. But again, I do not see anything in there that looks like it has congealed at all. Now you notice I am starting out on this piece of paper here. One of the reasons why I do that for is because, of course, I'm cleaning this airbrush in between paint colors, and there's always going to be some airbrush cleaner left in there. You can't get it all out every time. So a lot of this really watery looking part is not because of how the paint is thin. It is because of the airbrush cleaner that is in this airbrush. Hopefully you can see the difference now between the red that was here and the red that's over here. Okay, So enough of that, let's get started. Okay, I have finished painting these coal hoppers with our inexpensive acrylic craft paints that we reduced with our windshield washer fluid. Now we will be taking a closer look at these here in just a moment to see how the paint actually is laying on the models. But before we do that, I want you to keep something in mind. These craft paints, not only are they inexpensive, usually under $1 at most stores, but they were never ever designed to be used with an airbrush. And I hope that you can see here in just a moment how well this actually does work when these are reduced properly, whether you're using isopropyl alcohol like I have used for years, or this new method of using windshield washer fluid. And I'll tell you which method I prefer here at the end of this video. All right, let's take a closer look at these models. First up is our sky blue paint. This is our apple barrel paint. And these are all matte finish paints. None of these are gloss finished. Next is the sea glass color. This is our Deco Art Americana paint. Next is our moss colored paint. This is our folk art paint that we used. This is a pretty color. I do like this moss color. And lastly is our rust color made by the Anita's paint. Okay, there are all 4 of our painted hopper cars. I hope you like them. I like them. I think they turn out really well. The paint lays very nice on these models. If I were to use these on my model railroad, I would definitely top coat them with a matte clear coat, only because using acrylic paints on plastics, they will scrape off very easily if they're handled quite a bit, especially if you catch one with a fingernail. All right, so my final thoughts on using our windshield washer fluid to reduce our acrylic craft paints compared to using IPA. Will I continue to use this? That's a definite yes, guys. I like this method much better than using the IPA. And let me tell you why. Number one, there's no smell to this. IPA stinks. And it does not dry as fast as the IPA does. What I mean by that is when I was changing colors in my airbrush, I was able to rinse out the airbrush cup with water and all the paint rinsed out very easily. When I reduce these acrylics with IPA, when I go to change colors, I rinse out my paint cup in my airbrush, I always have a ring or a film around the top edge of my paint cup where the paint has actually dried inside of my airbrush, even though I've painted very quickly and immediately washed my airbrush out like I always tell you guys to do. I didn't have that issue with this windshield washer fluid. Also, it mixed just as easily, the paints did, it reduced the paints just as easily as IPA reduces the paint. Would I use IPA in the future? Yes. If I had a project that I needed to get done quickly, I needed to put multiple coats on, I needed to dry fast, IPA is the way to go. It does dry fast. Like I said at the intro, that's the reason why I love it, and the reason why I hate it is because of how fast it dries. However, this worked really, really well. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna do a little test. I took our moss green, that was the normal average viscosity paints that I see most of the time, and I took our rust red, which was a thicker paint. I put them back in the jars after I was done painting our hopper cars with them. And I'm gonna let them set for a week. I wanna see if these do congeal at all like they would have done already by now if I had used IPA. I have a feeling they're not gonna change at all, which that means that I can make up a big batch of a special mixed color if I'm doing a large project and put a whole bunch in a bottle and not have to worry about getting it all done in one evening. I can come back to it in the next few days if it takes a long time to paint it all up, and the paint will last longer, which is a big plus for me. So What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below if you like the idea of using this windshield washer fluid. I mean, a big jug of this was like $3, and this probably lasts me 3 or 4 years. It's cheap, it's great, it does not smell. Guys, I hope you try it out for yourselves. And you know, like always, guys, I appreciate you spending your time with me. It means a world to me that you guys have chosen to do that. And God bless you all, and happy railroading, everybody.